Hi, everyone. Thank you, Harsha, for the opportunity to speak at your summit. This is a great opportunity to discuss registries and rare diseases and so forth. The ALS is a rare disease. Um, like Harsha said, my name is Paul Mehta. I'm with the CDC National ALS Registry. And so this is just very quickly right here, no disclosures. So before I get started, I do want to talk about rare diseases very quickly. Rare diseases are rare, but they're not rare if they affect your family. ALS is a horrendous disease. And there's other diseases out here that today we discussed as well, which are also very life-impacting diseases as well. So though it's rare, my definition of rare is obviously, when it comes to the FDA, less than 200,000, or in India, less than 500,000 cases a year. But it's not rare if this impacts your family, because as ALS, you will learn, is a horrible disease. And I'm not sure how much you know about ALS. ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, is a motor neuron disease. It affects your upper and lower motor neurons. There's no cure for ALS. There are a couple treatments out there. They only extend life by about 3 or 4 months. So just very quickly, I'm just going over my presentation, how we came about, the National ALS Registry, our methodology, our risk factor surveys, other federal ALS research initiatives out there, the prevalence of ALS in the U.S., our biorepository we have, and how we support clinical trials and epidemiological studies, the research we fund, and the impact of the registry. So we are a population-based registry, so we cover the entire United States. This was enacted by Public Law 110-73 back in October 2008, and it tasked CDC to go ahead and create a population-based registry, specifically to look at the incidence and prevalence of ALS, epidemiology of ALS, that is, demographics of the disease, who gets ALS, and more importantly, to see exactly the risk factors for ALS. What's the etiology of ALS? We have no idea what causes ALS. We know what the risk factors are, but there are probably more unknowns and knowns about ALS. ALS is not a notifiable disease in the U.S. What that means, it means that it's not reported to CDC, such as other diseases like communicable diseases like COVID-19, HIV, tuberculosis, which are person-to-person transmission, which actually are reported. Cancer is reportable. Silicosis is reportable, as are other conditions as well, but ALS is not a reportable disease at this time. Because it's not reportable, we have to go ahead and have some novel case finding methodologies, which I'll go ahead and discuss momentarily. But because with the hierarchical of the public health system in the U.S., there are a certain number of states which actually do report ALS in their backyard. So Massachusetts is one of them, Vermont, Maine is one of them as well. Massachusetts actually has had the registry for over a decade now. California, I just learned 2 weeks ago, actually has their own registry they're launching as well. So California being probably the largest state in the entire country, as well as a fifth largest territory, or as in terms of GDP in the entire world, based on its population as well as economic powerhouse. So California certainly will be very, very interesting when it comes to looking at ALS in their own backyard, only because it's a very diverse state. Like I mentioned, ALS is not a reportable disease. Therefore, CDC is not notified who gets ALS. So what we do is we go ahead and have novel case finding methodology to go ahead and determine ALS. So this is our case ascertainment methodology. So one of the reasons why I kind of reached out to Harsha several months ago, there was an article that was published about how the Indians want their own ALS registry. And so I think registries are very, very important to figure out exactly what's happening in your backyard. So I'm going to go over some information about the prevalence of ALS. That's a number of people living with ALS at any given time. Incidence is defined as a number of new cases, but this right here is a case ascertainment methodology. The majority of our cases we get come from CMS, VHA, VBA, which is the Veterans Health Administration, and the Veterans Benefit Administration, and then CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We apply an algorithm which determines if you're an ALS case or not an ALS case. If you're not an ALS case, we'll do a follow-up. And we also get cases from the National ALS CDC's website. So patients come in, they answer a series of validation questions. From there, they'll be determined to be either a case or not a case. If you are a case, you can get information about clinical trials, take our risk factor surveys. We currently have 18 risk factor surveys. Join the National ALS Biorepository, as well as something called the Global Unique Identifier, which is sponsored by the NIH. So this right here is how we go ahead and ascertain who has ALS in the U.S. We also have the surveys, like I mentioned. So these surveys right here are really, really important for us to figure out exactly the who, the what, and the why of ALS. We ask about, where did you work? Were you in the military? Did you smoke or drink? Where did you live? Were you exposed to pesticides? Did you have any traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, as well as looking at disease progression. So we have something called the ALS FRS, Functional Rating Scale Survey, which kind of measures exactly how you're doing and progressing. We also have an open-ended survey, which allows patients to tell us qualitatively what they think causes ALS and what they think caused their ALS. We're in the process of actually evaluating that data and getting it published. But these surveys are very important for us to go ahead and figure out, like I mentioned, the unknowns of ALS. We currently have over 100,000 completed surveys, and so we actually publish a lot of data. Currently, I think we have over 100 published articles when it comes to just ALS risk factor surveys and so forth. Just very quickly, the Federal ALS Research Initiative. So fortunately, in this country, as opposed to other countries out there, we are very, very fortunate because we have the NIH, who actually is a funding powerhouse, and they do a lot of the basic medical bio research in here. They sponsor a lot of programs around the country, but they also look at other areas like biomarkers, genetics, and so forth. And there's also Department of Defense, which actually has their own specific ALS program, which looks at the preclinical development of therapeutic drugs and so forth. We here at CDC, what we do is we look at what causes ALS, because we're the only group in the US looking at the causality and the risk factors of ALS. And so for us, like I mentioned, whether it's environmental or whether it's environmental or whether it's occupational whatsoever, we want to figure out exactly what causes ALS, because if we can figure out what causes ALS, we could potentially prevent ALS down the road. Switching topics right here, the prevalence of ALS in the US, like I mentioned, we don't know the exact numbers. These are all estimates. And so we currently estimate there's about 30,000 persons living with ALS in the US. That certainly meets a definition of a rare disease. And so the premise behind this right now, that 30,000 number is coming from it's coming from Medicare, the VA system, as well as our own data. And we also employ something called capture-recapture methodology, which kind of helps us determine the number of missing cases in the US. Our registry alone, we have over 20,000 cases sitting who've actually have joined the registry since October 2010 when they joined. And what we do is we actually do something called cumulative prevalence. So if you're an ALS case in 2015, you are an ALS case until we find a death certificate from you. Then we'll go ahead and take you off as a prevalent case. So like I mentioned, the prevalence of ALS is like around 30,000 cases per US. Males get ALS at a higher rate than females. And whites specifically, especially males, whites get ALS at a much higher rate. We're not sure why ALS affects whites more so than any other group. Blacks also get ALS as well, and the other group would be Asians and Hispanics and so forth. So we are missing cases, and we know when it comes to underrepresentation, especially for minority cases, from Hispanics and Asians, certainly is that group right there, which actually is certainly we have to work on, because we know we're missing these cases and so forth. But just going back to what's happening probably in the subcontinent, we're not sure exactly what the prevalence of ALS is. I'm sure there are probably estimates out there, but I am very confident they're probably underreported, only because we're not sure exactly what's happening. ALS historically has been misdiagnosed. It takes at least 12 months to diagnose an ALS patient. And in the beginning, they can be diagnosed with carpal tunnel syndrome, fatigue, and so forth. And there's different forms of ALS as well. There's something called bulbar onset, as well as limb onset as well. I won't go into the details, but just going back to what's happening in India, I'm almost sure there's probably, considering the population of 1.5 billion or 1.6 billion, there's probably close to, I'd say maybe 100,000 ALS cases in India, if not more, but that's just my personal estimate right there. This right here just kind of gives you the rate. So currently we do our rates per 100,000 persons. And so the rate of ALS is 9.1 per 100,000 overall. Males are 10.5, females are 8.7, whites are 8.8. Blacks are 4.1, and the other group is 6.8, which we're estimating, like I said, makes up a proportion of Hispanics, Asians, and so forth. We also have a biorepository. Our biorepository works in the areas of genetics, biomarker identification, as well as environmental risk factors. This is a very, very large biorepository, encompasses the entire United States. We also get our samples sequenced and genotyped by the NIH. We have a close collaboration with the NIH, and they do all our genetics analysis and so forth. This biorepository, like I've said, is national. It's not a local biorepository. It's national representative. It's completely free for ALS patients. We come to the comfort of their home, go ahead and collect their blood or their saliva. Blood's more valuable. Saliva is really only for genetics typing and so forth. Like I mentioned, this is no charge for ALS patients for us to go ahead and come to the comfort of their home. We do both a pre-mortem and a post-mortem. So we also have a post-mortem component as well, which we work with Temple University and their tissue core. Switching topics. So we do a lot of clinical trial support. We don't do clinical trials at the CDC for ALS. We actually work with drug companies out there who want assistance in their clinical trials to augment their number of enrollees and so forth. This is open to both domestic and international researchers, not just for clinical trials, but also for epidemiological studies. We currently have over 70 institutions have actually used this particular system right here. These are some of the companies have actually used it. Amylyx has their drug already approved. Mitsubishi Tanabe has their drug already approved. Biogen has their drug already approved. And the Healy platform trial, I believe my colleague here mentioned something about how ALS and cancer are very, very unique. Cancer can certainly be rare as well. But the Healy platform trial follows the cancer model of doing a continuous evaluation of potential investigational products. So it's modeled after cancer. We also fund research. Research is very, very important. So the majority of our budget goes to funding research, like I mentioned, to figure out exactly what causes ALS and the risk factors. To date, we've actually published 26 research studies. We just funded 2 in September of this past year. We currently have a new funding opportunity announcement, which actually expires in December of this year. And this is both open to both domestic and international researchers. And it allows you to go ahead and apply to our program or grants.gov, that is, and submit a proposal. The areas of research that we fund are environmental research. So cyanobacteria is something that's potentially linked to ALS. We also look at pesticides, pollutants, biomarkers, genes. We're looking at the entire human virome. There was a publication that came out a few years ago which looked at Epstein-Barr virus and multiple sclerosis and how it found that link right there. The same researcher actually is doing the same thing with ALS, looking at the human virome as well to see if there's any sort of commonalities. We look at military service. Why do military vets get ALS at a higher rate? So we're not sure why that is the case, but the military vets in this country and even other countries are at a higher risk of getting ALS than non-vets and the individuals who have not served. Looking at TBI, chronic neuroinflammation, as well as gut microbiome and so forth. These are some of the institutions we actually fund. A couple from Harvard, Dartmouth, Columbia, University of Michigan, and so forth. We funded 2 international institutions, Trinity College and Karolinska Institute. Trinity College actually is out in Ireland, and what they were looking at was kind of unique. They wanted to see why the population of South America, specifically Uruguay, Cuba, and Chile, got ALS at a much lower rate than the population of the Irish cohort in Ireland. And so, because for whatever reason, Hispanics get ALS at a much lower rate than Caucasians. Karolinska is in Sweden, and Sweden has a very, very robust healthcare system. They're able to kind of get all their data together. They can kind of look at everything, whether it's did you serve in the military, where did you live, what were you exposed to, and so forth. And so Karolinska is doing that research right there. We also have other ones we've actually, I did not mention what they're doing, but this is certainly a very robust group of institutions that we actually fund. Just kind of gives you a schematic of what we do. Like I said, I mean, ALS, because it's unique, we do a lot more than just count ALS cases. Like I say, like I like to say, we have biorepository, the epidemiology of ALS, our partner groups who work with ALS Association, Muscular Dystrophy Association, Team Gleason, ALS Les Turner Foundation, some of the largest groups out there to kind of get the word out about the National ALS Registry so patients can go in and join. We have our survey data I mentioned, a notification mechanism which allows us to connect ALS patients with clinical trials, give them information about these clinical trials and the research we fund. But this right here is just, just a kind of summation of what my talk right here, the impact of the National ALS Registry. We are the largest ALS database in the U.S. for research. We work with drug companies as well as academia to help with their clinical trials and epidemiological studies. We have a robust biorepository. I mentioned we fund research. And in closing, it's looking at the who, the what, and the why of ALS. That's pretty much it. Thank you. So.